Hey everyone, it's Tim from Linessa Farm Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. So we have not had a live stream in a few weeks, so it is nice to be back. Just do some general question and answer with you guys. If you have any questions, make sure you type them in the comment section and I will do my best to answer. So we are getting wrapped up with baling, doing our first cutting here in Northwest Indiana. Took some animals to the sale barn recently and have a few other odds and ends going on, moving animals out to pasture, things like that. So sale barn prices weren't exactly what I was hoping they were going to be, but it can be difficult to know what's going on. I know here at our local fair, we don't have as many kids showing animals this year. Seems like we have a overall decrease. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's necessarily a decrease in interest, but the price of livestock hasn't been going up that much, but the price of feed has. So that does make things a little bit more difficult. Hopefully things will continue to improve. Boy, if we have a dry year again this year, like we have over the past few years, we could potentially be in trouble. So, when it comes to hay, you always want to make sure that you have someone lined up. You don't want to wait until you go into the fall or into the winter and then you need it and then you start looking for it. It is advantageous for you to work with your local producers now. Kind of take some time to talk to some individuals that may be baling hay if you're not baling it for yourself, and see if you can get either a price locked in or get a certain quantity that you can get locked in. It's not an exact science. Easiest way to figure how much hay you're going to need. A hay bale, a small square hay bale, will break down into about 14 separate sections. We often refer to those as flakes. And you can figure, roughly speaking, that you're going to need about one flake per head per day. So that's to say one small square bale can feed about 14 animals in one day. So you can kind of crunch the numbers based off the animals that you have and do the math and kind of see where you are. So I hope you guys are all doing well. Again, if you have any specific questions, please make sure to let us know. We have some videos coming up soon. We're going to talk a little bit more about urinary calculi. I think that's something important to talk about. We're going to be talking what else are we going to be talking about? We're going to do a complete remake on our copper sulfate worming video. Not that any of the information from the previous ones were bad, but I think I need to make one that's a little bit more specific, telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, maybe with a little less chit chat and a little bit more specific information. So hello to everybody that's on. April, I see you. Nice to see you again. Our favorite name of all the farms, Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm. Hello, my friend. Hope the goats are doing well. Sniper Scotty, hello from Arkansas. Thank you, my friend. Nice to see you. And Cheryl, hi, Cheryl. Cheryl's in Maryland. A lot of you guys have been with us for a very long time, and we do appreciate it. We're going to be heading back down to southern Indiana soon. Our friend Lee down there, they have all their animals give birth out on pasture, and I know he's got quite a few lambs that are running around out there, so we're going to go down there and see how things are going. What do you guys want to talk about tonight? Are there any specific questions that you have? If there are, feel free to ask and we can talk about that. April says, I'll be bringing home my first sheep in about 2 weeks, and I'm wondering what's the best way to introduce them to my 6-month-old Great Pyrenees pup. Best way to do it is to put them in together. 6-month-old Great Pyrenees pup should behave themselves rather well. You're just going to have to see how things go. If for some reason you're not comfortable with that, you can also work with like a single degree of separation. When we say single degree of separation, we mean, an area where they can get nose to nose with each other. This can be really good if you have an animal that you need to keep separated. It's healthy for them to be around the other animals, but sometimes you can't do that. And the best way to do it is allow them to get to where they can go nose to nose with one another. Now, you don't want to do this when you are talking about breeding stock. So when we talk about separating males from females, we like to have a complete degree of separation. That is to say, we don't want them to be able to get nose to nose with one another, because that's when you can end up with things like, bashing of fences and animals trying to jump fences and get caught and get hurt, things like that. So the Great Pyrenees pup, you'll want to introduce them to each other. Make sure that you're out there with them to allow them to keep an eye on one another, just see how the dog behaves around them. And then slowly but surely introduce them to where they're completely with each other. Now, if you had a puppy, that is to say, like a 8-week-old, 10-week-old puppy, something like that, I would say just throw them in there with them and let them go to town. But I think 6-month-old, 6-month-old Great Pyrenees is a pretty good sized dog. So start slow, introduce them and see how they do, especially since they haven't been around each other for a while. We just brought in some new sheep to the farm from West Texas over the weekend. We brought in a Royal White sheep, and we brought in another commercial Southdown breeding ewe from our friend Aaron Jennings out on his farm. And we did not immediately put them out on pasture because it's too much. It's too much stress. Too many things can go wrong. Our adult Great Pyrenees is out there, so we like to have them. We put them in with our lambs, and we're letting them kind of get the farm smell to them, get them so they're more comfortable, less flighty, and then we will take them out and introduce them. The other positive thing is we've got a nice solid fence here on our farm on the area where the lambs are. So if something spooks them, something like that, we don't necessarily have to worry about them running out through the fence, something like that. So great question. Yeah, April says 55 pounds. Yeah, 55 pounds for a 6-month-old puppy. So our friends at Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm, best way for getting when we're talking about lice and ticks, any recommendations for products you would recommend us to use? So lice and mites and ticks, especially when you're looking at goats, this can be a real problem. Now, for those of you that raise sheep, you're not going to have as much of a problem because, especially with the wool breeds, because that lanolin really helps to protect them against a lot of things. You can still get mites on the hair parts of the sheep, so you can get them on their legs, around their hoof. But on goats, you're gonna look at mange, lice, mites, all those things. So when we look at just general protection, they do make spray-on permethrin, a spray that you can use. There's a spray called Catron spray. I believe it's a Bayer product. You can use that. I'm not a super big fan of the diatomaceous earth. Not that I don't think it works. Now, we're not going to get into eating diatomaceous earth, but when we talk about sprinkling on our animals and on our bedding and stuff like that, it can work okay. The problem is it's really not good for you or those animals to breathe that in. If it gets in their eyes, if they breathe it in, if you breathe it in, it can cause some damage. So you need to be cautious about that. When you're looking at treatment, if you have an animal that has lice, mange, keds, any of that stuff, we use Poron. We use Silence, the Cylence. I'll type that in for you here. I'm a big fan of Silence. I think it works really well. We usually apply 10 milliliters along the, my doesn't seem to be working. So just Cylence is the name of that. And if for some reason it's not wanting to let me type here, so we'll just stick with it that way. I would apply 10 milliliters of that from the back of the neck all the way to the tail head. I also like to use injectable Dectomax. I think that works really well too. I use both. I feel that I'm killing them on the skin with that application, and I'm also able to kill them if they're blood sucking by injecting them with that Dectomax as well. So if I have a baby, if I had a kid or something like that, that may be 10 pounds, 15 pounds, I down my dosage to probably 5 milliliters. I know some of our viewers use Ultra Boss. I've never used Ultra Boss, so that's something for you to consider as well. But I think the dual usage of the Dectomax and the Poron seems to work fairly well. It's the time of the year for broken legs. If you've never experienced a broken leg with a goat kid or a lamb, it can happen from time to time, and you'll normally see it when they're at that young age where they like to run around like they're crazy and jump and frolic and do all that stuff. And it's important, if you have an animal that's limping, you need to check them out immediately. Now, sometimes this is just a simple sprain or a strain. Sometimes they may have stepped on something or they have something stuck in their hoof. But if you notice in the pastern itself, that is to say where the leg meets the foot, if you would happen to notice a possible dislocation, you can usually tell because it's going to be right there at the bend where the foot meets the leg. If you have a break, generally speaking, that break is going to happen in that long bone on the lower portion of the leg. If you did ever get a break, what we would like to see you do is keep it as straight, reset it as straight as you possibly can. And then we like to utilize cardboard. So make a cardboard splint for that animal's leg, put it in that cardboard splint, and then we want you to wrap it good and reasonably tight with some Coban. Coban's kind of that old style ace bandage that sticks to itself. You can pick that up at Tractor Supply. You can pick it up at CVS, Walgreens, anywhere like that. Tractor Supply has nice colors. You can usually find it in the horse section at CVS or any other place. It's just going to be a tan or a khaki color. And so you don't want to wrap it up so tight. If you've ever had a cast, you know, they put the cast on and it's tight, but it's not so tight that it's cutting off circulation. And you're going to want to leave that on there for at least 6 weeks. Anti-inflammatory drugs can help as well. So you're looking at, you know, any kind of anti-inflammatory drug that you could possibly get your hands on from your veterinarian would help as well. You shouldn't be dosing them very heavily, you know, like dexamethasone or something like that. We'd be looking at a single one-time treatment. You can utilize other painkiller medications such as Banamine, which has a dual purpose of anti-inflammatory and pain medication in there. And it's something that, you know, it's just like on a person that's going to be 6 to 8 weeks. Now, it can damage. Here's my take on broken bones. So broken bones, I would tell you, unless it's a really important animal to you that you really, really want to hang on to, you may want to consider getting rid of that animal. And the reason for that is we have what they call growth plates that are in our bones that help to determine how long the bone's going to get. And sometimes with a leg break on a young lamb or a kid, you can experience damage to these growth plates. Not always, but you can end up with long-term problems where perhaps that leg doesn't grow appropriately. You may end up with one short leg. As far as bumps are concerned, lumps, things like that, that is common, and that is something that you are going to experience with a broken bone. So when you remove that splint, you're still going to have a pretty hard lump there, or even a softer lump that'll eventually turn hard. We call that a callus, and over time it will eventually go away. So just something for you to consider. Not the end of the world. They do break bones. We've had one break a bone this year. We splint them up 6 to 8 weeks, take it off, and they're usually good to go. So Cheryl asked the question about what age do you start the trifecta worming method on kids? So we like to start it at weaning, and weaning is going to look different for all of you. So what she's referring to with the trifecta method is when we start worming our goat kids or our lambs, the initial thing that we like to worm them with is a white wormer. So this can be Panicure, this can be Safeguard, Panicure, or you can go with something like Valbazin. And the reason that we like to start off with a white wormer is the white wormers kill white worms. And so when you think about like tapeworms, that's something that Valbazin or Safeguard is effective against, that the clear wormer families like ivermectin, Dectomax, Prohibit are not. So your babies are going to be the ones that are more prone to tapeworms. Some of you may not have tapeworms on your property. Most of you will, some of you won't. Generally speaking, you can see them in the feces. You'll start to notice little white segments in the feces, but not always. If you've got barn cats, things like that, your propensity for having tapeworms may be slightly higher. Anyhow, we start off with the white wormer. We give them a break, and that break's usually about a week, give or take. You can be slightly more aggressive, but what I would tell you is start off with the white wormer, wait about a week. Then chase that with a injection of Dectomax. I'm a big fan of Dectomax. And why is that? Why would I tell you to do an injectable worming medication instead of an oral medication? And the reason I do that, and the reason that I advise that, is because it's far easier and much more easy to keep track of when you're doing an injection. That is to say, if you've ever orally drenched an animal with anything, there's always a chance that they're going to spit some of it out, that they're going to choke on it and cough. You may not get it all. You may think you get it all, and then they turn their head and it all comes out their mouth. And then you're like, oh, great. How much of this did they actually get? How much of it did they lose? And if I need to dose them again, how in the world do I determine what to do or how much to give? And so that's where the injection really comes in handy. You know exactly how much you gave them. You know that they got all of it. And you know that it's in their system and it's going to start working. So again, white wormer, then we do our clear wormer. And then from there, that's when we move into our copper sulfate worming. So we're talking about the 1% oral drench of copper sulfate solution. And I want you to think of the copper sulfate solution as a maintenance dose. I don't want you to think of it as treating worms. I want you to think of it more as, I have an animal that is clean and I want to keep them clean. I am not saying that copper sulfate will not worm an animal. It will. I just feel that it can be a little bit too strong. So if we have kids, if we have lambs, I'd like to see you start off with a 50 milliliter oral drench. Now, you're not going to be able to shove this down their throat and give them a drench like you might be able to with like a 3 ml or a 5 ml or even a 10 ml. You're going to have to go a little bit slower, and you're going to have to allow them to swallow as you go. Think of it more as them drinking it instead of doing that old school natural drench. People do this as often as every month with good results. I don't necessarily know if you need to do that. You could probably get away with doing it every couple of months. And again, if you do find that animal, you go to check that animal and you see that that eyelid is gone completely white again, something like that, you basically have to start over again. You're going to have to start over with a chemical wormer and then get your way up to copper sulfate worming. So why do we say this? Well, that copper sulfate wormer is very, very strong. I kind of think of Prohibit as being in this class too, as a very, very strong wormer. And what can occur is if you have an animal that does have a heavy worm load and you hit them with a powerful wormer, they're going to drop that worm load right now. And what you're going to find is you're going to possibly get an animal that gets very, very sick. They possibly can get scours very, very badly, which can lead to dehydration, and you can have a whole slew of other problems. So we like to be as gentle as we can, and we like to think of the copper sulfate wormer as a maintenance wormer. Now, if you have an animal that you're having to worm every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, copper sulfate will work. And I tell people, just because it works doesn't mean that you should be doing it. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if you find that you have an animal on your farm that has to be wormed every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, that's a problem with that animal, and you need to consider getting that animal off of your property. Just because you can get those worms out every couple of weeks doesn't mean that that's an animal that might be, in its right place. We may not want to keep that animal. That animal's constantly shedding worms, and we know that it's constantly, for whatever reason, doesn't have very much of a good natural immunity to it. So just some food for thought there. So Sniper Scotty says that he lost a Nubian kid a couple days ago, found it down with small bubbles coming out of his mouth. Temp was 99. Was this pneumonia? It's very, very difficult for us to say that. So with a bacterial infection like pneumonia, generally speaking, you would see a very high body temp. The body temperature would actually increase. 99 would be kind of the low end. Now, if an infection goes really bad, even in humans, what we'll see is infections start off with high temps. And we all associate that with being sick, right? You take your temp, you're running a fever. Once an infection goes systemic, once we reach a point that we're in something that we call we call sepsis. That is a systemic infection throughout the body. A lot of times the body temperature will actually crash. So if we see a patient in the hospital that is really, really sick with some kind of an infection, and all of a sudden body temperature starts to drop, blood pressure starts to drop, that's a really, really bad sign that they have a really, really bad infection. So it's difficult to say. This is the time of year for bloat. Scotty, I don't know if you had the animal out on pasture, or if you introduced a new kind of feed or perhaps a new kind of hay, but the bubbles coming out of the mouth could possibly have been a bloat related incident as well. But yeah, sure, it could have been pneumonia that just kind of slipped through the cracks. You didn't get a handle on it early enough, and sometimes you just don't notice, and it may have progressed itself to that point. So lower body temps, yeah, we're getting close to death when we start to see that happen. So good question, difficult to know. So what can we learn from this situation? Well, I don't really know. A couple of things to maybe consider, and that is, we talk a lot about walking every day and looking at the animals. Not saying that you didn't, just something for other people to consider. And I think it brings up a valuable point of how important is a thermometer for you to have on your farm. Everybody should have, if you're raising dogs, cats, sheep, goats, whatever. I think a thermometer is a very important tool because it can kind of give you some insight into what is going on. If you notice an animal that's not feeling very well, maybe separated itself from the herd or the flock, maybe they're going off a feed or whatever, a great thing to do up front is just take that animal's core body temperature, see where that is at. Are they around the 101, 102 mark? Are they running, which would be normal, somewhere between 101.5 and 103, I would normally expect to see. You get an animal that's running 104, 105, that animal's running hot, and you have a serious issue that you need to get a handle on, more than likely a bacterial infection, possibly viral. If you get a really low body temperature, you're looking at 98, 97 to 99, that could be a really, really bad infection. So just something for you to consider there. If you notice an animal going off a feed, if you notice them off by themselves, just not acting right, go for the body temperature, see where they're at. And keep a close eye on them and see if there's anything else that catches your eye. Check those eyelids, put your finger in their mouth, see if their mouth is dry, see if their mouth is moist, see if they, if they got a warm mouth. That's another great one to do. So kind of difficult to answer that, but hopefully that gave you some insight into some things to think about. And for those of you that are watching, hopefully that gives you something to think about as well. So Baker Coffee Maker, would a broken leg baby still be okay enough to grow out for meat, assuming everything went okay? Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times we have one that we splinted and she's just fine. They just get around just fine. It heals up and shoot, you won't even notice. Long before the splint comes off, they'll usually be putting weight back on it and doing fine. There's nothing saying that you wouldn't be able to utilize that animal for meat. If you're not noticing any long-term, problems, you could possibly even consider keeping them for breeding. I'm not telling you absolutely have to get rid of the animal. If the growth plate is messed up to where that leg's not going to grow appropriately, you're going to notice it pretty soon. But there's no reason to euthanize an animal that has a broken leg. There are instances where you would have to euthanize the animal if the animal has a compound fracture, that is to say that the bone is completely broken and outside the skin. That would be a episode to consider euthanizing the animal. If the animal has something broken in the shoulder, something like that, to where you feel it and it just feels like it's all crunchy in there and you can feel that it's a lot more shattered than anything, that would be a situation where you would want to consider euthanizing the animal as well. But leg breaks happen and dislocations happen in feet. So hopefully that answered your question. So Dectamax can be purchased online. I know Valley Vet carries it. For any of you that are on here that are buying Dectomax, let us know. Type in the comments. Let us know where you're picking it up. I believe we purchased ours. I have a contract with a animal pharmaceutical company, and so I can purchase pharmaceuticals a little bit differently than most of you can, but I know Valley Vet is another one, and that's the only one that's ringing a bell right now, but I know there's more. I think Premier One carries Dectomax. I'm not 100% sure. It's a little salty. You're going to look at, of course, everything's getting ridiculously expensive now. And we can talk about price gouging here in a second, especially on things like penicillin. When you're looking at Dectomax, just remember it's only 1 milliliter intramuscular injection per 110 pounds of body weight. So a little bit of Dectomax goes a really long way. And you can buy a bottle of that and it will last you for a very, very long time. So go to Valley Vet, check them out. Go to Premier One and check them out. And if anybody else has any ideas, feel free to let us know. I have a ewe who lost her kid 4 days ago. Sorry to hear that. I'm assuming another ewe bucked her. What is the best treatment for the ewe? So I'm assuming that this ewe does not have any more babies. So if this ewe does not have any more babies, you would want to, well, there's a couple different answers to this. Grafting would probably not be appropriate. Trying to graft another lamb to her would probably not be appropriate unless you have babies being born like right now. And even then, it can be extremely difficult to have a ewe that's that far along that loses her kid. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to treat that ewe just like you would when you're naturally drying off a ewe or a doe for weaning. This is the same answer for both animals. Now, if you had a doe and you wanted to milk her, you could now utilize that doe for milking. But if this ewe is the only baby and now she lost her baby, you need to treat her just like you would with a normal ewe drying her off. So we're going to remove grain. We're going to remove any really high nutrition hay. You're going to put her on kind of crummy hay for a little while. And you're going to slowly watch her start to dry out. I don't advise withholding water. Some people would do that. I don't. The other thing is, you just really need to keep an eye on her. Now, a veterinarian may tell you to give an injection of dexamethasone, something like that. I know some guys will do that if they have a ewe that loses a baby early and she's like in full milk. They'll give her some injections of dexamethasone to help her dry up a little bit. Some guys swear by LA200 and say that helps them dry up as well. I don't really know if that's necessary. I think you just treat them responsibly as you would any other animal that you're trying to dry out for weaning. Just make sure you keep a little extra eye on her. It's a lot easier, obviously, to dry out a ewe or a doe when they're farther along. And like I said, if you run into this issue with a goat or even a sheep that you decide you want to milk, you can do that as well. I suppose if you had babies that were on a bottle, if you didn't want to go through the athletic event of trying to graft one of those babies to this mom, and you probably wouldn't be successful anyways, you could milk this mom out and utilize some of that milk for a while to feed that baby. But I think drying them out is probably going to be your best bet. You're going to want to watch for mastitis. It's going to be normal for that ewe or doe's bag to enlarge a day or two after you've pulled that baby or when you've gone to weaning. But it should go down. If it's getting really, really large, if it's getting really, really red or hot to the touch, or you start to notice what we call crepitus, which is kind of a crunchy, crackly sound underneath the skin, you've got some big problems and you need to address that immediately with a veterinarian and some antibiotics. So our friend Sniper Scotty, thank you. We have lots of rain out here and grass is growing. Yeah, I found it when I got home from work, so it could have went down in the morning and laid all day before I made it home. Yeah, the animals don't go by our schedules when they go down. That is for sure. But you bring up another very good point, Scotty, and that is the quick growing grass. So when we put animals out in the springtime on very fast growing grass, that grass is going to have a lot of nutrition to it, and it's going to have a lot of nitrogen in it, and some other things. But what it can be lacking in is magnesium. We talked about this in one of our recent videos, and it is important to remember that they refer to it as grass tetany, is something that you may have heard this term before. And grass tetany is caused by a overall lack of magnesium in the diet. And what you'll notice a lot of times is you'll notice neurological symptoms. The animal may be acting off. They may have poor balance. They may be down. They may be twitching. They may be kind of stargazing. And anybody that's dealt with like polio or something like that before, somewhat similar symptoms. So what's the easy fix? What do we want to do? Well, we always want to make sure that we offer a good free choice mineral to our animals, even when they're out on pasture. That's very, very important. You know, some people will tell you just to throw an animal out on pasture. And that's a bad idea. That's something that you don't want to do. People don't do that. Even our friend Greg Judy and some of these other guys that are really big about super hard culling and putting animals out on pasture, they still offer their animals free choice mineral all of the time. And that is because you just can't tell what they're getting and what they're not. Now, when you get into free choice mineral, you have lots of different options. You can offer free choice minerals like we sell on our website at linessafarms.com, where it's specifically for sheep or specifically for goats. You can use the buffet style mineral feeders, whatever it is that you need to do, but you need to make sure that they're getting all of those free choice nutrients all the time, that they can have it anytime they want. And this will help you to avoid things like grass tetany. The other thing that we've talked with you about in the past, and that I'm a huge proponent of, and I'll tell you again, is baking soda. Baking soda is really, really good for lots of different things. It's good for keeping down bloat. It's good for preventing issues like laminitis, which would be a foot problem. And it helps with feed conversion. There's lots and lots of scientific data out there to show that baking soda, aka sodium bicarb, works really well. Do you need to buy feed grade sodium bicarb? No, not necessarily. You can go to your local grocery store, Sam's Club, Costco, anything like that, and buy yourself some sodium bicarb that way. And we just put it out free choice. And what you're going to notice with the free choice sodium bicarb and baking soda, same thing, is that some days they'll eat it and some days they won't. And it's very interesting to see what kind of a pasture you're putting them on and how they eat it. If we put our animals out on a brand new stretch of pasture, the very first thing that they go for is they go for the legumes. Those are things like our alfalfa and our clover, and those are notorious for bloat. And what we'll notice is they'll eat all that first, and they will just wolf down the sodium bicarb. And then as the legumes start to get cleared out, or there's not as many of them, the animals will, and they're going more for grass, you'll notice that their sodium bicarb intake goes down. I keep free choice sodium bicarb in front of my animals all the time. From the time they're born, just all the time. The adults have it, the lambs have it, the kids have it, everybody has it anytime they want. So I picked that up from Dr. Kennedy from Pipestone Veterinary. He did that, and he picked up on that later in life, and was a huge fan of it. And I am too. I just think, geez, that's what a cheap way to deal with these issues and stay on top of it. Of course, when we talk about moving animals out to pasture, we want to make sure we don't put them out there hungry. I would prefer that you don't put them out there if it's wet. Wet clover seems to want to bloat a little bit more. And I always want you to keep a bottle of TheraBloat on hand as well. You can pick up a bottle of TheraBloat on Amazon. You're going to see it. It's going to look bigger than it is. You get it in the mail, and it's literally like this big. And you're going to be like, I can't believe I paid $14 for that. But I'll tell you, if you get an animal that gets bloat, that will fix it up right now. So thank you very much for the question. That's a great question, and it helped us to segue into a few other valuable points as well. So thank you. Let's see what our friend Ross has to say. Hi, Ross. So Ross says, "Good evening, and thank you for this. I have a starter flock of 10 ewes. Very good. And they were all pregnant, and now I have 21 sheep. Congratulations. How long before weaning and how long before bringing on a ram?" So that's a tricky question, but I'm glad that you asked it. So I like to tell people we like to shoot for weaning at about 8 weeks of life. If we were doing accelerated weaning, we could start weaning at 6 weeks. You can wean all the way out to 12 weeks. A lot of it's going to depend on your setup, how well those animals are, growing, and what they have available to them. This brings me to another point. So I'm gonna tell you a quick story. We got a call recently from someone, and they said, "My animals reached their weaning age, and I started to wean them, and I'm having all kinds of health problems." Well, what had happened was this individual had not introduced much other feed to these animals at all. They were in a dry lot situation. They had a feeder where the babies were not able to get in there and eat a lot of hay because of the setup that they had. The moms were kind of pushing them out. They, when it came to water and things like that, they just weren't prepared. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to introduce all this new feed stuff to these animals at weaning. I think that's a problem. We want you to set up a creep area for your babies, for your kids, and for your lambs. And some people say, "Well, I don't feed grain, so I don't want to set up a creep area." And I would tell you, even if you don't feed grain, I still want you to set up a creep area. So, what is a creep area? A creep area is a small area where your babies can get into and your moms can't. We have a video about that you can check out. Just do a simple search for Linessa Farms creep or creep feeding, and you'll see it on there. So, what are you going to put in your creep area? Well, you're going to put some nice hay, you're going to put some water, and you're going to put a place where the animals can just kind of get in there and get away from mom. If you choose to grain feed, you can grain feed in your creep as well. But we want these animals from day one to have access to getting their own hay, getting their own water, getting their own feed without having to compete with those adults for it. That way, when we wean these animals, we know that, hey, they're drinking water, they're eating hay, they're doing everything they need to do. So now I don't have the stress of wondering what is going to happen when I decide to wean. Now, if I have an animal that's being offered free choice grain and things like that, to where they're really packing on the pounds, maybe for market lambs or market kids, and I know they're growing really, really well and they're getting really, really big, I may be more inclined to wean at that 6 to 8 week window. If I have them that are just on grass, or just on good quality hay, and they're still drinking water and they're doing fine, mom's bags look really good, I might pull them out longer to 12. I have a few goats that I just cannot wean the babies at. I just can't wean them at 8 weeks. Like, the mom's bags are still so big and so full of milk that I am going to get mastitis. It's going to be an issue. It is so hard to dry them down, and I know which ones those are, and that's fine. You just do it. You do the best you can. There is no exact science when it comes to this. Different things are going to work for different people, but just something for you to consider. So shoot for that 8 week window, see how they're doing, and go from there. Get yourself a creep area set up if you don't have one already set up. As far as when is the best time to bring a ram in, that's completely up to you, and that's completely up to how much money you want to spend. So when we look at introducing rams and bucks to our farm, sometimes the best bang for your buck, no pun intended, is going to be to pick up a juvenile in the spring when they're a little bit smaller, and you might be able to get a little bit of a deal. We run through kind of a lull in the midsummer where the market lambs have been sold, the 4-H and show lambs and kids have been sold, and you might be able to find yourself a deal. The other thing that you may be able to find is you may be able to find an experienced buck or an experienced ram that maybe that someone's had them on their farm, and they've used them up. They can't, they've kept so many of the daughters that they can't breed them back into the flock or the herd anymore. That can be another time for you to get it. So I'm more concerned about you finding yourself a deal than I am about you running out and buying something right now. I like to get them when they're young. If I'm looking for a new one, I like to go out, pick one out, get one, raise him, kind of get him used to me, and kind of learn what his demeanor is going to be before we run into breeding season. And then, of course, the big question is what time of the year do you plan on breeding? If you're going to let your ewes go into estrus naturally, they're probably not going to be breeding until sometime this fall. And in that case, you just need to make sure that you have a ram or a buck that is sexually mature by that time. Again, that's going to depend on the breed. Some breeds sexually mature very, very quickly. Some of them can take longer. So that's something that you would want to talk to your breeder about and find out, or do some research online, find out when they are sexually mature and go from there. So there is no necessarily right or wrong answer there. Just take some of those points that I made, think about it, and see what works for you, and go from there. Bakers on a few acres. Hello, my friends. Is it safe to bale hay off a pasture that's been grazed, or are parasites an issue if you do that? Generally speaking, the parasites aren't going to be an issue. The parasites have kind of a shelf life that they're going to go through. Now, if you were going to bale it and immediately feed it to them, then yeah, you can run into some issues there. If you're going to bale it and store it for a while, then I would say I wouldn't have too much concern. A couple benefits of baling: those bales are going to go through a sweat. They're going to go through a period of time where the internal temperature of those bales is actually going to get pretty darn warm, to where that will help to eliminate some parasites, not all, but some. And then once we start getting out past the 3-month stage, a lot of those parasites are not going to be viable. Again, not exact science. If you're going to bale a ground that's been grazed, be cautious as to what your regrowth is, and make sure that you're getting enough nutrition that it makes it worth your while. That would be the other thing that I would consider. But no, most of us are going to get bales made and we're going to sit on them for a while. And in that case, yeah, you're very good to go. But if you're going to feed them immediately, then yeah, something for you to consider. That's a fair question. Hopefully that answered your question. April. Hello, April. So April says, I've read that buttercups are toxic to animals, and there's a ton of buttercups outside. Do sheep tend to avoid plants that are poisonous, or should I try to avoid the worst areas? I have also read that buttercups are poisonous. We have a few plants that are out in our pasture that aren't necessarily good for the sheep or the goats if they get into them. We have never really worried about it. We've never had too much of a problem. Yes, so the animals will tend to avoid. I don't know how they know, but they know. There are some nightshade plants that the animals they'll eat everything around them and they just won't touch them. How that is, I don't know. Now, I suppose if you put yourself in a situation where you had starved them out and the only thing that they had to eat in the pasture was that, then you might be looking at problems. But overall, they do tend to avoid plants that are not good for them. A lot of these plants have to be eaten in a pretty large quantity in order for them to be poisonous to them, but not all. So, testing helps. Putting them out in the area, see what they do, see how they respond to it. That would be something to consider. The other thing to consider this time of the year, I want you to be really cautious when it comes to pruning. And when we're getting into the gardening season, I want you to be cautious of pruning. Not all of these plants are safe for your animal to eat. So if you're going to pull a plant out of your garden, if you're going to trim a tree, make sure you do some quick research to see, okay, is this poisonous potentially to my animal? Cherry trees are a good example of that, to where they can release some toxins. Once they start to dry out, that can be poisonous to your animals. Plants like peppers and tomatoes might not be good to feed to your animals as well. So it's a very good question that opens up a few other points of consideration. So, and that can be something that kills your animal as well. You may go out there and find an animal down and foaming at the mouth or frothing at the mouth with no bloat, and perhaps they got into some kind of poisonous plant, and that got them as well. So, uh, interesting stuff. The rabbit hole is very deep when it comes to that. I have an application that I use on my phone that you can download, and it tells me I can identify plants by just taking a picture of them. And so I take a picture with my phone, and I believe it's called Picture This, something like that. And it just tells me what the plant is. It tells me, if there's anything that I need to worry about with it. And it tells me, if it's native to my area, how it grows, if it's a weed, what it is. So that's always cool to look up as well. We had some questions recently when it came to hot wire fencing, when it came to lambs and goat kids. And one of the people asked me, they said, well, when do you turn on your fence? And I tell people, I want you to keep that fence on all the time. If you have an electric fence, keep it hot, especially when we're introducing lambs and kids. We want them to learn that the fence is not their friend. We want them to learn that if they try to eat through it, that they're going to get shocked. No one likes to see their animal get shocked. It is not a good thing, but it is important for their safety. And when we're looking at predators and things like that, we want to protect those animals from getting out. We want to protect other things from getting in. And we always want to practice like we play. And what I mean by that is you need to leave it on all of the time. Otherwise, they're going to get used to it being off. And they're going to start to challenge it. And then when you finally do turn it back on, you're going to run into situations where heads might get caught, hoofs might get caught, things like that. So that's always something really important for you to consider. We have a few herbal products that we're going to be coming out with soon. I am not changing my worming protocol. We were looking more for a natural product that we could use in conjunction with worming that would help do two things. One would be kind of ease and soothe the digestive tract in case there was any kind of discomfort. And the other thing was looking for things that were going to help with the worming process as well. So we've got a mix that we're coming out with soon. I'm going to make a video about it. If you choose to get it from us, that's great. But I'm also going to show you how to make it for yourself. So this is going to include things like wormwood, garlic, neem, Solomon seal root, and some other things. I've been delving into the deep weeds of these herbs recently. Just trying to see how far the rabbit hole goes. And surprising to me, there is more and more scientific literature out there showing what works and what doesn't. Unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of these herbs and things like that, is there's kind of a sweet spot as far as what works and what can hurt them if you give them too much. So just something for you to keep in mind. So keep an eye out for that. If you guys have any ideas for videos, if there's something that's troubling you on your farm, if there's problems that you're having and you want to see a video on it, by all means, shoot us an email at customerservice@linessafarms.com. Send us a message on YouTube or Facebook at our group on Facebook, Linessa Farms Tack Box. And chances are, if you're having issues with something, other people are as well, and we don't mind. It's hard to come up with ideas sometimes. So April said yes to the electric fence. My pup stays behind electric fencing, barely 3 feet tall. Even if it falls down, she will not go near it. Yeah, and we used to joke when I was a kid. And our friend at Vets Grow Fuzzy Butt Farm can tell you, goats, from the day they're born, and for the rest of you that grow and raise goats, from the day they're born, they're trying to find a way to get out. And when I was a kid, we used to laugh at the sheep because we would have a single hot wire up on the farm, and you would take the hot wire down and try to move them. And the sheep would not want to, they wouldn't even want to cross the line where the hot wire was. They'd walk up to it and they're like, nah, no way. Goats, on the other hand, nah. My goats shock themselves on we have a hot fence for our hard perimeter fence that's putting out like 9.9 thousand volts. And the darn goats will shock themselves every couple of days, just for fun, just to make sure that it's still there and it's still on. Where the sheep, they won't even look at it. And the dogs respect it as well. So, it's always important to keep it on. Well, the other thing that I have noticed that's very interesting to me, it seems like with the goats especially, is they can hear the click. They can hear the snap of that electricity. And you guys know what I'm talking about when it's real quiet and you're standing by your electric fence and you can actually hear that pulse go through it. They can hear that. And when that pulse stops, it's like they know. They're like, oh yeah, it's off. So keeping in mind some safety things that you can keep in place with your electric fence. They do make lights that go on electric fence. We utilize them here at Linessa Farms. So I can look out my window and I can see if that light is flashing. And that tells me if my electric fence is on. That helps out a lot. The other thing that you guys may or may not know, if you watch any of our previous videos, is I have a kill switch that's at foot level. So if I'm carrying like 2 buckets of feed, or if I'm carrying a lamb or a goat kid or something like that, and I need to turn my fence off, I can just walk over to the kill switch and knock it with my foot, with my boot, and turn it off. Don't do it with your flip-flops on. I won't get into how I know to tell you that. But a kill switch down by the ground can come in handy as well when your hands aren't able to get a hold of it. I wanted to wrap up tonight talking briefly about urinary calculi, and some of you may have just groaned and rolled your eyes because I know we talk about this a lot, and I apologize, but it is very important. Males are far more prone to urinary calculi than other animals. And for those of you that are getting into, maybe some of you don't know, if this is new to you, if you're new, especially to castrated males, wethers, it is a very big deal. Urinary calculi is a very big deal. This is a calcium phosphorus imbalance. You always want to make sure that you have at least 2 times as much calcium as phosphorus. You can also treat their water with things like ammonium chloride. Urinary calculi is going to rear its ugly head mostly in grain-fed animals that are being pushed hard for show or for growth, that have a improper calcium phosphorus ratio. So when people tell you, oh, don't feed grain because it's going to give them urinary calculi, that's not true. What is true is you need to watch for a calcium phosphorus imbalance, and that is what will get you into trouble. So Cheryl says, is 45 days good for rotational grazing, or should it be longer or shorter? Well, Cheryl, that is the number one question that we get asked every year, and it is so hard to answer. But I'm glad you asked, because it's an important question, and we run into this a lot when people ask us about things like, how many animals can I have on a certain size paddock? How small should I make my paddocks? How soon should I move my animals? And that is really subjective. It's going to depend on how much rainfall are you getting, what type of plants are you having, and what is the nutritional benefit of those plants. How much are they really getting off of them? So there's a worm load cycle that we can look at as well. And so you're going to have to look and see, what is the sweet spot that I can get? And what I would like to tell you is, I would like you moving them as often as you can tolerate. And for most of us, that's going to look something like every week, every 2 weeks. Some super high intensive grazing folks will run them into a pasture and just let them eat the tops off of the grass, and then 4 or 5 days later move them to another one. Some people move multiple times a day. So you're going to have to see what you can tolerate. Yes. If you leave them on there, the longer you leave them on there, the more worm load they're going to drop on that certain piece of real estate. And the farther down they eat in those plants, the more susceptible that they're going to be to things like barber pole worm as well. I don't know if 45 days is a good thing or a bad thing. I would honestly have to come out there with you, and I would have to look at your pasture, and I would have to look at your animals, and I would have to say, okay, you still got a lot of untouched food in here for them to eat. If I was saying, after 45 days, you're down to like they've ate it all down fairly well, I would say, yeah, you're probably waiting a little bit too long. Rotating more frequently isn't necessarily going to hurt you any, other than the fact that it's going to take more time. If I have all my animals on one pasture we'll use 30 days as an example. Let's say I have 2 paddocks. I run all my animals on one paddock for 30 days, and then I move them to the second paddock for 30 days. And after that 30 days, I find that, they've both, the one's been eaten down, the other one's regrown. I would have been far better off rotating them every 5 days, and I would have got the same end product. It would have slowly went down. But I can avoid things like, and probably 2 paddocks isn't a good example. I should have said more like 4, because there's the beauty of having them off the pasture for a long period of time is the real correct answer when it comes to worms. So I kind of misspoke there. What I was trying to say is you're going to get the same amount of food, and it's going to go down at about the same pace. But I was not considering the fact that having them off of that piece of real estate for a longer period of time will help benefit them to not re-ingest those worms. So it's a trick bag. It is really, really complicated, and it's very, very unique to your property. So I hope that makes sense. We want them not to stunt the growth of the plant. We want that plant to still be able to grow back and thrive quickly. But we also want to be able to have them off of it long enough that any parasites that are on there can die. Now, some people will utilize cattle in this manner. They'll let their sheep and goats eat down to a certain level, and then they'll move them, and then the growth that's left, they'll move their cattle onto. Cattle just digest barber pole worms. They just cook them in their rumen, and it's not an issue. But again, very complicated question. If you have more in-depth questions about this, Cheryl, or more unique questions specific to your farm, just reach out to me, shoot me an email, and we can kind of talk about it more at length, maybe more specific to your farm, and see if we can come up with a plan for you. So April says, don't forget to hit the like button. Yeah, the like button helps us out a lot. When we first started making, even probably within like a year ago, I would say I'm not a fan of asking for people to subscribe, and I'm not a fan of asking people to hit the like button. But it does help. Where it helps is it helps to push our videos so more people see it. So if you were on YouTube one day out of the blue, I assume all of you just kind of found us out of the blue, unless you were told about us by someone. And one of our videos popped up on YouTube where it was just like, hey, you might like this. That's because people are watching, subscribing, and liking our videos. And so it does help us out a lot when you guys do that. Length of video watch time actually is a big killer too. Something that we've learned about as we've been making videos. YouTube cares a lot about how long people are watching your videos, and they want that retainability. So that's another big one as well that YouTube folks often struggle with. So David said, thanks for all you do. Lots of help when I need it. You're very welcome. David, we're here for you guys. So if you have questions, ask. I don't mind. It's hard to get upset about people asking questions online on Facebook and YouTube when that's what you're doing for a living. So every time you guys ask a question, every time you watch our video, you are helping us out. And like I said, you're helping other people out as well, because we've all either gone through this or we're going to go through it. And no, a little sarcasm, but it's always more fun to learn from somebody else's mistakes than your own. That's a little bit more tolerable. So thank you guys very much for being with us tonight. We're at an hour. Matt. Hey, Matt. When keeping doe lanes, how closely do you watch for teat conformations, such as extra teats, especially in crosses? Great question, Matt. So this is a huge deal. When you are looking, and there's a reason why when a lot of these shows, in order to register animals, they have to have a very specific teat conformation. So when you're looking at extra teats, fish teats, that's where it kind of splits at the end like that. What you can get with some of these extra teats, fish teats, malformations, things like that, is they may not produce milk. And as crazy as it is, sometimes you'll get a baby that'll try to nurse on a teat that is not producing milk, and it can really knock them back. And we're talking more when they're itty bitty babies, when they're brand new babies and they're kind of in that wobbly, awkward stage and they're looking to latch on to mom. I cull pretty hard for teat malformations for a couple reasons. One is the one that we just talked about, and the other one is because it tends to be carried through in the offspring. So if you invite a problem onto your farm, and we're going to go over now, and that's okay. If you got to go, I understand. But it brought up another important point. When you're talking about genetics, you want to be pretty darn critical when you're bringing these animals onto your farm. And I'm not talking about, getting the most gigantic champion animal. What I'm talking about is structural soundness. I will tell you right now, if you get an animal that's from a champion goat or a champion sheep, that's fantastic. And I'm glad that you got it. But if it's off in the mouth, if it has a malformation in its back, if it's got bad shoulders, if it's got a bad walk, any of these things, it's not a good idea to bring that onto your farm and keep that as breeding stock, because now you're bringing in a problem that you didn't already have that now is more than likely, possibly, going to carry over into your offsprings. Offspring. It's the plural is still offspring. And so it's going to carry over into those little ones. And I just had an individual contact me the other day and they said, "Hey, I'm looking for breeding stock. I want to get some breeding stock, and I want to get something that has this one really good attribute." And I'm not gonna name their name or anything, because I'm not trying to embarrass them at all. And if you're watching, not my intention at all. I'm trying to just give a learning point to everybody else watching. They were very concerned about one specific attribute of an animal. It wasn't leg shag, but let's say it's leg shag on a lamb. And they said, "I want the animal with the best leg shag you have." Didn't ask a single question about anything else. Didn't ask if it was a twin. Didn't ask how many babies the mom usually has. Didn't ask for body weight. Didn't ask if there was any malformations. Didn't ask how its walk was. Didn't want any of that information. They just wanted the animal that I had with the best this trait. And that's not good. We always want to look for the most complete, structurally sound animal first, and then we want to get into the bells and whistles, the other things that maybe more of kind of the show things, like good leg shag, or maybe a color that you really like, or whatever. Nothing wrong with nice color, nothing wrong with great leg shag, nothing wrong with any of that. But there's a lot more important questions that you need to ask, and a lot of that you can only do with your eyes. You always want to check that mouth, you want to check that bite and make sure it's appropriate. You always want to watch that animal walk. You always want to look at that animal's teat structure. If you're going to buy online, have them shoot a video and have them do a walk around of the animal and have them send that video to you so you can see them walking. Have them show you the mouth. Have them show you, anything that you feel that you need to see in order to know that you're getting a good, structurally sound animal. And then you can start incorporating some of those other things that you want in your farm as well. So that was a great question, and I really do appreciate it. Ellen, hi Ellen, nice to hear from you. I always love your videos. First time encountering a live chat, enjoying immensely. Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Ellen. I greatly appreciate that. All right, so Paul, hey Tim, this is Hummingbird Farms. Thank you for all you do. I've been a longtime subscriber. I usually watch live chats on Thursday and Friday. Well, thank you very much for being here. We don't get a whole lot of people that watch the live chat live, but like I said, I can see when people are watching videos through our YouTube algorithm tool that we utilize, and a lot of you watch this from work. And that's okay. You're getting two things done at once. You're learning about sheep and goats. You're getting to meet new people with new farms, and you're getting paid, at work. I care far more about you watching a live stream than I care about your productivity at work. So I say keep doing it. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was exciting to see some of our friends that have been with us for a long time. It was exciting to see some of you that are new. We will be back next week. I'm Tim from Linessa Farm Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next time.